Hello and welcome to Academy Radio. Today I've got a special guest, Sebastian Lewis, who's going to be talking about Kidderminster Harriers' history over the last 130 years. Welcome, Seb.
It's a pleasure, Lewis.
So, Seb, how did Kidderminster Harriers start?
Well, originally they were an athletics club, in which later on in 1880 they turned into a rugby club. It was only 6 years later until they formed as a football club. The Harriers started playing their games at Chester Road and emerged a new rival in the town, Kidderminster Olympic.
Two Kidderminster football teams.
The Kidderminster Olympics were one of the biggest teams in the area, and in 1889 they finished top of the league, the Birmingham District League, and Harriers finished second. And the reason Harriers play their home games at the Agba Stadium is because they later merged and Olympic started to play at the Agba. In 1890, the now merged Kidderminster Harriers were the first team from Kidderminster to compete in the FA Cup, losing in the round of 32 to Darwin 3-1. And after protesting that the pitch was poor, they were granted a replay in which they suffered a heavy loss of 13-0.
13-0? Blimey. So, wasn't Harriers the first club to purchase a player for over £5,000?
Yes, that's true. In the 1924-25 season, Harriers managed to be runners-up in the league after making national headlines with the signing of Stanley Fazakerley being the first £5,000 transfer in English football. There was a new club record set in 1936 when Harriers striker Billy Boswell scored a record 64 goals in a single season.
So, Seb, what happened to Harriers prior and during the World War?
Prior to the war, in 1938, the Harriers won the West Midlands League in the season in which they were undefeated. And 3 years after World War II, Harriers rejoined the Southern League during their first game 1-1 in the front of a crowd of 3,000 plus.
So, Seb, what happened in the early 50s?
The early 50s was another time when the Harriers would make national papers, when Ted Croker and England international Jerry Hitchkins were playing in the 1953-1954 season, when became history makers in hosting the first ever floodlit game in the FA Cup when they beat Brierley Hill 4-2.
Okay, so I'm just going to stop you there. So, those of you that have just recently tuned in, thank you. And we have a special guest, Sebastian Lewis, who's talking about the history of Kidderminster Harriers over the last 130 years. If you've missed anything, you can join us on demand at bmet.com. And we've got a total of 242 people watching us live on the internet. So thank you for joining in. Back to it, Seb. So who is the current record goal scorer for Harriers?
Well, Peter Wassell went on to make Kidderminster Harriers' current goal scoring record with 448 goals in 621 games. In 1983, former player of Aston Villa joined the Harriers as player manager, which eventually saw them being promoted to the Midlands Alliance, which is now called the Conference. In the 1970s and 80s, Harriers were invited to play in the Welsh Cup, which saw them reach the final on two occasions, first time in 1986 and the second in 1989, but they were unfortunate not to win any time. In 1989, Harriers then formed their youth team, being the first team in non-league football to do so, and to produce a talented bunch of players. In 1994, Harriers had a great season, winning the conference, but they were refused promotion due to the main stand being made of wood.
Okay, is that because of the Bradford Stadium fire?
Well, yes, of course. The fire at Bradford resulted in the football league, saying that if your main stand was made of wood, it'd be a risk to the fans' health. So Harriers unfortunately weren't able to be promoted that season. In 2001, Harriers received their biggest sell-on fee of £700,000 for the sale of Lee Hughes to West Bromwich Albion back in 1998.
So is that the same Lee Hughes that was involved in a hit and run?
I believe so, Lewis. I think he accidentally killed a Coventry fan, but he actually later went on to play for Coventry, I believe. So it must have been due to regret. I can also tell you, Lewis, Jan Moby signed superb John Hodge at the start of the season. Harriers won the conference title in Moby's first attempt, staying clear of 9 points at the top over Rushden and Diamonds. After their title win, Harriers started to get low attendance and again of lack a lack of revenue. Due to ITV Digital collapsing, Harriers struggled to make their mark and soon relegated down to the conference after 2 seasons. In the 2012-13 season, Harriers started it badly. They lost their first 5 games and drew the next 5. But then, one of the most incredible turnarounds in football history happened. They won 22 out of 26 games, which put them top of the league, and one of the most informed teams in Europe with the likes of Barcelona and Bayern Munich. Burt was sacked as Harriers manager in January 2014 after losing 6-0 to Luton. The next day, Andy Thorne took the reign at the club, and as a result of this, Joe Lolly scored his first hat-trick for the club. After impressing at the Harriers, the prolific Joe Lolly was sold to Huddersfield Town for the sum of £250,000 after only 6 months. After only 54 days in charge, Gary Wilde, Steve Burr's number 2, took over at the club. Wilde managed only 13 of the last games of the season, but he managed to take the club to 7th in the league after they drew 6 of those games, of just falling short of the playoffs.
Thank you for being on the show today, Seb.
Thank you, Lewis.
We've got another guest coming in. His name is Josh Morris, and he's a fan of Kidderminster Harriers, and he's just going to be giving us his review on Kidderminster Harriers' season so far. But in the meantime, here's a documentary about the most recent history of Kidderminster Harriers. We've heard the history from the past, but what about the most recent?
We're here at Agworth Stadium, home of the Kidderminster Harriers.
And we're going to document the most recent history.
Gary Wilde signed his 1-year contract in 2014 to see him through to the rest of the season. Harriers started their season off strong by winning 7 games.
Between September and the Christmas period, Harriers went on a run of 15 games, which no game had the same result back to back. With this consistency, this left them just outside the playoffs.
At the end of the season, Harriers released goal-scoring Michael Gash and Carl Storer after they reached 150 appearances. Now with Gash gone, Harriers took the chance to reassign ex-West Bromwich Albion striker Lee Hughes after 18 years of leaving the club.
Just after Boxing Day, Harriers were sitting 6th. Despite being in the playoffs, they then only went on to win 3 of the remaining 20 games. They then dropped 10 points and ended up finishing 16th.
This year's season started with the same poor form Harriers finished with last season. They went on a winless run of losing 11 games, and last September they saw Gary Wilde leave the club.
Colin Gordon took over as Harriers manager until October. Then Harriers appointed former professional right back Dave Hockaday as manager. Unfortunately, Hockaday only managed 13 games, winning just 2 of the 13 games, which saw Gordon come back in as manager. Harriers' season didn't go the way they hoped, as they were confirmed relegated after a 0-0 draw against Barrow on Saturday the 16th of April.
Harriers signed John Eustace as the new manager. Eustace will start next season, leaving Colin Gordon to finish off the rest of the year as manager, and he'll go back to his old post as chief executive.
Matt Gardner, the former Torquay and Shrewsbury midfielder, has decided to come back into full-time management. The 42-year-old has joined Harriers as head coaching and will be assisting John Eustace as his number 2.
And that's not the most recent news for the Harriers. There's been a new record for the Harriers and English football. Harriers have become the first team to score 500 wins in the 5th tier, but unfortunately this record hasn't helped avoiding relegation.
Back to me in the studio. Thank you, Lewis. We are now joined with Josh Morris in the studio. Welcome, Josh.
Hello. Glad to be here.
So how old was you when you first went to a Kidderminster Harriers match?
6, 7 years old, I'd say. My dad took me up there. It was absolutely brilliant. Stadium was just breathtaking. I'd never seen anything like it before. Just to see all the players warming up and thinking, like, I had that dream. I wanted to play for Kidderminster Harriers when I was older. I really wanted that, but didn't happen.
So you enjoyed your experience there?
Oh yeah, I absolutely loved it. I'd highly recommend going to see Kidderminster Harriers. Yeah, they're a low league team now, but back in their day, they were the prime. They were the best thing going.
So as we just heard from Sebastian, the history is amazing.
Oh, the history of the club is absolutely brilliant. There's been some top-class strikers come from Harriers, such as Lee Hughes, although his future wasn't the best, as we all know, but what's that got to do with anything? But he was absolutely phenomenal. Best player I'd ever seen at the Kidderminster Harriers.
What are your thoughts on a new manager coming into Kidderminster Harriers?
Oh, I think it's about time. Manager's had his part, he's done his time. Well, he's not exactly doing the best for us at the moment, is he? He's just got us relegated, and I think it'd be brilliant to have a new manager come into the team.
So do you think Harriers will promote next season?
Hopefully. I'd like to see it happen. I think everybody would like to see the Harriers go up another division. It would be brilliant, but, well, just have to see when it comes to it, won't we?
Thank you, Josh, for joining us in the studio today.
It's been an honour, mate.
Okay, so we're going to end the podcast here live in Kidderminster. We're going to hand you over to Stowbridge. And thank you to everyone that's joined us in the studio. Thank you to the cameramen who have made this podcast go live on the internet. It's a goodbye from me, and it's a goodbye from everyone, really. Thank you.